Nothing that's more fun than staying up every night till about 3 o'clock in the morning working on my book. Actually, it gets tiring after a while, as far as the mentality required to constantly take apart and construct and run things in my head as far as these abstract spatial and counterspatial geometries. But I mean, it's been clear for a really long time. Well, really long time, I should say years, but the problem is expressing that, specifically regarding what is magnetism. I've spent, I don't know, half a lifetime figuring it out, and I've finally figured it out. And of course, I have to give complete thanks to, countless entities. I mean, if we're not for study of retroduction of the ancient Greeks, which is a lost methodology for comprehension. This is actually the true secret of the Pythagoreans and the Platonists, is retroduction. It's not induction or deduction. It's retroduction. Platonic methodology and thinking, the works and writings of Nikola Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, those people as well, specifically also being able to comprehend something the ancient Greek Platonists also comprehended, but expressed in a different sense, is counterspace. It doesn't matter whether you call it subspace, counterspace, non-Cartesian substrate to phenomena. But without actually all of these things combined, my comprehension of, the very bottom to the very top of what magnetism is would have been impossible. The ancient saying is that by standing on the shoulders of giants, I've been able to see farther. But I haven't seen farther. I mean, I've seen all the way to the bottom and to the top of what magnetism is, and the only really frustrating thing, and it's actually the most beautiful thing, is being able to comprehend that and being able to actually play what is going on, construct it, and work it like a working piece of perfect machinery, which machinery is really an insult to something so sublime, is not the impossibility of expressing what's going on, but I've had more than a few people say that I use word salads in discussing things, and I actually think like that. Those are not word salads when I talk about reciprocating processional hyperboloids, hypertrochoidal geometries, hyperboloids, and toroids, and conjugate toroidal hyperboloidal geometries working in unison as far as space, counterspace, force and motion, inertia, and acceleration. It's not a word salad. I mean, I actually think in my own mind like that. Not only that, actually, a lot more convoluted than that, which mere vocabulary and vocal expressions would imply. Fundamentally, being able to understand magnetism requires one have a grasp of not only what is Cartesian and palpable as far as what is measurable, and of course fields are not measurable. Everything we know about fields, so far as the four Maxwellian field equations, are expressions of an effect over a period of time with a given vector, but this has never defined what a field is. So they have no Cartesian ultimate reality except as expressions through their own action. Modern science, in its convoluted ignorance and pure atomism and materialism, conventionally speaks of waves and fields of waves and waves of fields, but waves are not things. There is no such thing as a wave. A wave is not what something is. A wave is what something does. Being able to comprehend what magnetism is requires that you, within your own mind, being able to superimpose a conjugate geometry, kind of like male and female, light and darkness. This is the conjugate geometry of the toroid and the hyperboloid. A toroid, of course, would be a donut shape, and a hyperboloid would be an hourglass shape. This would be a perfect toroidal shape. I assume you know what a toroidal shape is. The constructive and destructive interference, for example, seen in the ferrocell is simply the fight, if you will, for lack of a better term, but rather the pressure mediation of the conjugate geometries of force and motion, inertia, and acceleration respectively so, force and motion being magnetism, or what is specifically the dielectric field. Human beings and our stupid, pathetic intellects and comprehensions of denoted magnetism is one thing and dielectricity is another, and they're one and the same thing. It's as stupid for human beings to think that magnetism and dielectricity, which form the conjugate geometry of the entire universe, as two different things, is ridiculous to think that water is one thing and steam is something else and ice is something else. Well, no, it's all exactly the same thing. It's obviously the water molecule under different expressions of itself. To think that magnetism is something other than dielectricity, like a magnetic block or a cube or sphere is emitting magnet. Nothing is being emitted. One of the hard things for you and even for me many years ago was to, make the obvious, countless thousands of obvious realizations, given wisdom, that a magnet does not emit a magnetic field. First we have to define what magnetism is, and we have to define what a magnet is, and then we have to make all these countless realizations from which and by which, without comprehending the Platonic methodology of retroduction, is utterly impossible. A magnet is simply a coherent mass that's operating on a macroscopic scale as far as the block or the mass itself, whether it be samarium, cobalt, neodymium iron, boron, or ferrite, or otherwise. That a magnet does not emit anything. It is a field perturbation. Magnets, of course, do not accelerate towards one another. Also, if you were to apply Platonic retroduction to the simplex fact of not even understanding magnetism fundamentally, and understanding that human beings in our complete ignorance think that magnets attract or they repel, well, they do neither. This is force and motion and inertia and acceleration, pressure mediation. You also make note that they do not accelerate towards each other. They rather accelerate towards a null pressure point between the two, which has no Cartesian reality. They are accelerating towards the smallest spatial, i.e. counterspatial. When you say the smallest spatial, what you're implying is counterspace. Space and magnetism are one and the same thing. These are distinctions without a difference. These are differences made that have no distinction in the ultimate reality of comprehending what these fields are in relationship to one another. Constructive destructive interference between the force and motion, inertia and acceleration passing each other, as seen in the ferrocell, is no different than the resultant view of the double slit experiment, where we have constructive interference and destructive interference. We actually have the pressure mediation of force and motion, i.e. magnetism, mediating itself out with its conjugate sister or conjugate brother, that being dielectricity. This is the conjugate nature of force and motion, inertia and acceleration, the two fundamental principles of the entire universe. Those taken together are overlapping. They are negative images of one another. If you actually take the negative image of a torus like this, you will find that the negative image of the torus, or the toroid, would be a Poincare disk model, or specifically a hyperboloid, i.e. an hourglass shape. Take the negative image of that inertia and acceleration, which, an hourglass has a null vector at the center, which terminates in counter space. Magnetism, and this is something that would take like a dozen videos, and this is part of my 4th edition, is explaining this, and it would take a really, really long time to explain, even though it's so divinely simple, is that neither a magnet, nor a laser, nor a starlight, for example, is coherent light. Well, sure, it's coherent light, but what do we mean by coherency? Specifically, what it is point source. Coherency is not things working in phase with one another. I mean, that's a connotation which is denotatively accurate under observation, but what it is point source emission. Let me reiterate those 3 words again: point source emission. And like I said, some people are going to get what I just said. Other people are just going to scratch their head and go, what the hell is he talking about? It's not everything operating in unison, like tap dancers all working in synchronicity. is point source emission. They all follow, by the way, the projective geometry of the Poincaré disk model. Ultimately, geometry is only about, since magnetism and space and volume are all one and the same thing, we are talking about spatial geometry, and all geometry refers to things with magnetic divergence and volume thereof. The sister to that, the inverse, the actually origin, would be counter space. It would be the hyperboloid under field coherency observation. That's the conjugate nature of what is seen underneath the ferrocell before I ever even heard of a ferrocell. Just notice in a ferrocell there's a huge black spot in the center. That is, of course, the bottleneck coming down to a null point in counter space of the hyperboloid or the hourglass-shaped geometry of increasing inertia and acceleration. Magnetism is the dielectric field. Magnetism is the loss of that inertia. And it's actually an equation I found in Plato's Republic 509d, 511. The rate of that loss of inertia follows a simplex equation, which I actually have tattooed. And it's my discovery. Nobody else's. Tattooed right over here on my wrist. Someone actually, I forgot, I wore it a couple days ago. Someone made me a t-shirt with that equation. I'm so glad I thought of that at the time. Let me show you the t-shirt that was made for me. This is the equation that's actually tattooed on the inside of my right wrist here. That's my discovery. And someone would say, well, that's a number. That's 4.23606, 5 to the power of negative 3, 1 over that. Any such fraction is not a number. Well, sure it is. 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3 is 4.23606, or 5 cubed. That's a number. No. I mean, anytime you stick one number over another, you have to look at the actual, not mathematical statement thereof of the expression, but the fact that that is an expression. That would be the loss of inertia. But getting into that would take like another dozen, actually take a lot more than a dozen videos. Everything we understood about what magnetism is or is not is absolute BS in the extreme. Magnets do not have poles. It has the inverse of counter space. A magnet is not field coherency, is point source emission, the same thing as starlight and laser light. We think, well, in like a helium neon laser, we have 100% mirror and 95% mirror, and the light bounces back and forth until it becomes coherent, and we have emission. That's not how a laser works. It's point source emission. It's the same reason why you have coherent light from a star, is because the point source is, a bazillion kilometers away. Bazillion's not a word, I know. Polarity is not mere divergence, but being dimensional, it necessitates geomagnetic divergence and precession. All of these things that we fundamentally think we understand about magnetism is, of course, absolute BS, and this is solely due, not solely, but mostly due to the pathetic nature of human ignorance. We think a magnet has poles. A magnet does not have poles. We think his polarity is merely this. That's incorrect. The reason for what we see underneath the ferrocell and the comprehension of the torus and the hyperboloid working in perfect conjugate connection with one another, because since both are one and the same. The hyperboloid is the inverse image of the torus, and the torus is the magnetic image of force and motion divergence, and the inverse image of the hyperboloid. Divergence is not merely this, but it is also this. If you actually take dimensionality from a point source, that dimensionality inverse to the loss of inertia necessitates not merely this, but also this. And if you extrapolate out this to this, and then bring the lowest pressure mediation to fruition, we actually have the torus and the hyperboloid. And this necessitates not merely this, but also the completion thereof, and that would be, of course, geomagnetic precession, which also necessitatively introduces phase. The phase, interestingly enough, of any coherent samarium, cobalt, or neodymium iron boron follows a phase or a ratio of 1 to 5. This is the reason why the countless amazing videos that I've made on seed experimentation show the same thing. We have a phase variance of 1 to 5. Literally, time and the nature of growth is at a phase variance of 1 to 5. either seed exposure or seed exposure and growth. It always is the same. Anybody that's done this experiment will find the results exactly the same. Even the most skeptical people that have done these experiments said, you're right, I did it, I didn't believe it, but it's totally true. But that's a matter for another video. Countless videos, which I've already made well over like a year and a half ago. Those videos you would think would be stunning and looked at by so many people, but apparently just people scratch their head, they don't understand what's going on. Even if they don't understand what's going on, you'd think they would actually appreciate the frigging results. Magnetism follows this two-dimensional circle of the Poincaré disk model. Its creation of a torus is necessitatively due to the pressure mediation, which must create not only divergence, but divergence in precession in the extrapolation of the loss of inertia, such that we do not have polarity merely like this, but also like this, and the fruition thereof, which could create the torus. The torus, of course, is, well, ultimately, if you extrapolate out the full torus, we end up with a sphere, but that's getting a little too complicated. Then, of course, we have the atom. And the inverse image of that, like I said, is the hyperboloid. But this is a field pressure which is mediated only due to the mass itself, which means that there is zero dimensionality in ultimate reality of magnetism, or that which we call magnetism, i.e. the loss of inertia. It is strictly two-dimensional. But due to the nature of the loss of that inertia and geomagnetic precession, it must follow and create a torus resultant to the mass from which that loss of energy is released. The force of motion, divergence, and the reintegration, which is increasing in acceleration and inertia, which defines the hyperboloid of the flip side of the coin, if you will. I mean, the nature of the entire universe is a coin. It's like, well, a coin has a head and it has a tail, doesn't it? That's right. The flip side, magnetism and dielectricity. This is actually the most beautiful thing I'll ever see in life, and it's not seen, but it's understood. And I build it, and build it's an incorrect word, but I'm able to see it in absolute, complete clarity from every angle, top to bottom, in my head, and that's actually the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm always seeing it. Not always, not every second of the day, obviously so. The mundane nature of reality in life, garbage, laundry, groceries, take a shower, all that crap, including taking a crap, right? That's the most beautiful thing that I'll ever see. I can actually say that while I've used other people to stand farther and look farther, without understanding retroduction, possible without understanding counter space, or trans-Euclidean or non-Euclidean geometry, impossible without understanding field theory from the true masters, not scumbags like Einstein. And people have actually attacked me for attacking Einstein. It's like, I'm only repeating what Tesla said. Tesla called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot, and that's exactly what he is. Einstein himself was the biggest fool for reifying space as something that acted upon other things, but as Tesla accurately and famously said, space has no properties, and of course it does not. Space is no different fundamentally in principle than a shadow. A shadow is not a thing. A shadow is the goddamn absence of light. We cannot reify the absence of something as having principality. This is also applying Platonic logic to understanding field theory. We can't reify crazy crap. Like, Grandma got scared because she thought she saw a unicorn and she had a heart attack. Therefore, unicorns gave Grandma a heart attack. Like, no, the chick was hallucinating, and she had a heart attack and died. This doesn't mean that unicorns exist. Well, sure, it gave her a heart attack. She thought she saw a unicorn. Shadows in space and unicorns, all of these are the same thing. These are pathetic concepts given to things which are absences, which have no principality. They are not nouns denotatively from the sense of field theory and metaphysics. They cannot be given any credence as something that acts upon something else. And this, of course, was Einstein as a hardcore materialist and fundamentally a mental midget. He reified space, the bending of space, this is the fundamental reason why I've called Einstein a dumbass, because he was a dumbass. And This isn't my view. This is the view of one of the smartest minds who lived in field theory, Tesla. Who said that Einstein was an idiot for reifying space. Space has no properties, he said. Einstein is a fuzzy-haired crackpot, he said. All of this is true, but let's forget about that idiot Einstein. So this is the most beautiful thing I will ever see, and I can close my eyes. I don't actually have to close my eyes, and then imagine it instantly, and it's full glory. How it works, why is there's no proper English word, but the ancient Greek word is ananke. Another Greek word for it would be prohodos. The word to translate ananke as necessity, in other words, it can't be any other way, is really a defamation of what the word ananke meant, as used by the Pythagoreans and the ancient Platonists. So it's kind of like using the word logos, which we translate as word in English. Word. Logos does not mean word. Conventionally, it means that in some contexts, but I mean it's bullcrap to call logos word. 100% of the voluminous universe is 100% due solely to magnetism, and understanding this fundamental, not the most fundamental because magnetism is a dielectric field, the most fundamental thing would be dielectricity and counterspace, i.e. the ether or pure inertia in the true denotative 16th century of the term inertia, not modern connotation of inertia, but that forms the conjugate nature of the entire universe, dielectricity and magnetism. Without understanding these two things fundamentally, from top to bottom, front to back, means that progress on the most fundamental scale of human understanding of the nature of the cosmos is absolutely impossible. And it cannot be achieved from the chair of stupidity, i.e. Quantum mechanics, which is quantum as a BS word. Because fundamentally this is atomism, it's materialism. It's a belief that Mother Nature is a crazy hooker on crack with a bag of magic particles and everything's a particle. These people actually believe virtual photons are being emitted by a magnet. That's not what I'm saying, that's what those demented assholes are saying. Virtual particles. That's hardcore atomism. Plain and simple. So anyway, I hope you liked this video. This was me ruminating, and I could go so much deeper, and it would take 1,000 videos to do so. Literally well over 1,000. And this was dumbing it down. This video was dumbing it down, and people are still going to accuse me of, oh man, you used a word salad there. That was just too much. I don't get it. It's like, I really dumbed it down a lot in this video. And that always frustrates me too, actually. It's like, I dumbed it way down and everybody says they're still frustrated. It's like, I couldn't follow you. It's like, isn't it amazing the most simplex thing in nature? The conjugate geometry of force of motion, inertia, and acceleration, i.e. dielectricity and magnetism, is so divinely simple, but not simplex, therefore nearly impossible to explain at the level of current human intellectual comprehension of the nature of how stuff works, because we only understand things that are spatial. We don't understand counter space. At least 99.999% of humans don't. So, Loxi Veritas. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can click the link below. Tell me to jump off a cliff, whatever makes you happy. Goodbye.